Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. If you saw the last video where we did the detailed inspection on the high mileage Z06, then you saw that it's got wobbly harmonic balancer syndrome. We've got to change this out and we're going to get started next.
Toys for life.
First thing I like to do is secure the steering wheel and have an obvious visual sign so that nobody turns the wheel. If you turn the wheel while you're doing this job, there's a sensor spring in there and that'll get wrecked and that'll be a big headache and they're hard to find. The next thing I like to do is to remove the ground cable from the battery, and that's going to prevent any sort of electrical issues while you're working on the car. Next up, we're going to go ahead and just break the lug nuts loose on both sides before we lift it up in the air. That'll make it a lot easier to get the wheels off. Next, using a 15mm, compress the tensioner pulley and remove the serpentine belt. Inspect the tensioner pulley by flexing it and making sure it doesn't seem weak and making sure that it's smooth operation. But I'm not particularly fond of how this sounds, so we're going to get a new one. And with a little finagling, you can get the belt out and inspect its condition. This one looks to be in pretty good shape. Next, we're going to remove the sway bar end links and then the sway bar itself. If it spins, you're going to have to use an Allen wrench to hold the stud and then the wrench to remove the nut. And do the exact same thing on the other side. Next, we're going to remove the 13mm bolts holding on the sway bar bushings and drop the sway bar. I like to reattach all the hardware, so when it comes time to put it together, I know exactly where everything is. Next, we're going to remove the tie rod end from the steering knuckle. And then I put it back on a few turns so that I know the nut is seated, and I'm going to hit it with a hammer that's made out of lead so that I don't damage the threads or the nut. And typically these come out super easy compared to cast iron knuckles. Put the nut back on so we don't lose it, and I'm going to do the other side. While it might not be absolutely necessary, I'm going to remove the fan shroud because that's going to give me quite a bit extra room and it'll lower the frustration factor as we're working on the dampener itself. It's just a series of clips that holds the harness to the shroud and the connectors to the motors, and then from the top I think we just have to remove the plastic hold down bracket, and from there it just pops on out. And then from the top we just remove the air bridge and then the radiator hold down, and we should be able to pop the fans up and out and they'll come out the bottom. And then if you can see it, this bracket right down here, all I did is just lift up on the radiator shroud to lift it up and out of that bracket, and now it's going to drop out from the bottom. There's a couple on the bottom that have to pop out too, but it basically just sits in some clips. It's not bolted to the radiator assembly. And for the 15 minutes it took to take that out, it gives us just a ton more room. Next thing we're going to do is remove the two main power steering rack bolts. They're 18mm on the front and then 18mm nut on the back. So up on top, I've just run a piece of wood across here with a bungee cord, kind of holding up on the ABS unit or the EBCM unit, so that it will be supported when I remove the bracket. The bracket just has these two 13mm nuts, one on each side, that we have to take off. Next, I'm going to remove the bracket that holds up the EBCM or the anti-lock brake unit. We've already removed the one steering rack bolt, and now we've got two more down here and then the two up top. And again, I like to put the bolts back where they came out of, so there's no question later what bolt goes where. All right, now I'm on the driver's side. I'm going in and I have to remove these two lines from on top of the rack. It's pretty tight to get in there, and you don't want to get grease and grime in your rack, so I'm going to be spraying them down first with a little solvent, and I'll be cleaning in there as best I can to get any grease and grime off of there, and I'll blow them out. I'll do that a couple times because you want that super duper clean so you don't contaminate anything inside that rack. It's going to be hard for me to video this, but just imagine spraying it with a little brake cleaner and then using the toothbrush and compressed air, doing that a couple times until you're satisfied that it's clean. And take a look at that. Much, much cleaner. Guys, just a quick ask. Videos like this take quite a bit of work. If you're getting something out of the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up. Okay, now after we've cleaned the top of the rack where these two lines go in, we're going to use an 18mm line wrench to break this loose. And I've already broken it loose, but I just want to show you that you're going to want to get on this top one first from here, and then you can break that loose. And then if with any luck, you should be able to use your bare hand, which I am, to spin that one off. And then we'll work on the second one next. Okay, and then the second line, now that we've removed that top line, the second line, this is coming in from the driver's side wheel. You're going to want to get your wrench on from basically by the A-arms here, 18mm line wrench, and you're going to need to bust it loose here, and then again you should be able to do it by hand after you break it loose. So again, between the 18mm line wrench and an 18mm stubby, you should be able to get those lines off from the front and then from the side. And then when you pull this line off, it's going to drain all the fluid that's in that reservoir. It's not much, so just let it drain anyway because it should probably be replaced. The next step is to remove the steering column from the rack. And that is that bolt down there. It's a 13mm, and to get at it, I'm going to use an extension, a long extension, with a socket. Voila! Alright, now I'm going to remove the power steering cooler from the rack and hang it up high where it'll be out of the way. This is the spot at which things get tight, and I'm not able to get it through, so I am going to go ahead and lower the cradle down, which is what I've had to do in the past. And you do not want to use an air impact on these. It can tear the stud loose from inside the frame, and you've got big problems. So you want to do this with the good old-fashioned way with a socket wrench set. There's one on each side in the front, and there's one on the back, and you want to loosen these up until there's no more thread showing, because you're going to need that space to get the steering rack out between the cradle and the frame. I like to loosen each nut 2 turns at a time and work my way around all 4 of them until I can get the cradle down far enough to slide the rack out. Again, do not use an air impact for this. You will wreck the way the stud is secured inside the frame. The funny thing is you actually have to insert a screwdriver to provide a wedge to push down on the cradle, because the leaf spring is actually holding the cradle up to the chassis. So now that I've got that wedge in there, I should be able to slide out the steering rack. She's not happy about coming out, but as long as you take it easy and guide her carefully, you'll get her out on the floor. So now that I got the rack out, the last thing I want is anything to get into either one of those holes. So I'm going to bunch up some paper towel and stuff it into each one to prevent that from happening while I'm changing out the balancer. For removing the harmonic balancer bolt, I've always just used an air impact. If you've got to use a regular breaker bar, then watch till the end where we tighten up the harmonic balancer, because I've got a special tool that I got from Summit that holds the balancer nicely so you can do it manually. Guys, we hit our first snag. Here's the bolt that I pulled out, and I'm not happy with the way the threads look on the end. They actually, you can feel it and you can see it if it's zooming in. They're not stripped, but they're definitely funky. And by comparison, here is a bolt out of one from my C5 when I did the harmonic balancer 3 years ago. You can see there's a little bit of discoloration at the end, but the threads are in perfect shape. And the problem is, I still have to pull the balancer off, but when I use my installer tool, when we're putting the new balancer on and I screw this in to the crankshaft, this should spin in freely all the way in easily by hand, and I can only get it in a couple of turns. So I'm really concerned about the crankshaft thread, and I'm not sure if at some point in time somebody retightened this down too tight or what might be the issue, but it's concerning. So guys, I hate it when stuff like this happens, but it does when you're working on cars. It's kind of the nature of the beast. I've got a couple of different options that I'm going to talk to the owner about, and he will decide on which one he wants me to proceed with. We'll do that in part 2. So guys, if you learned something from this video, please hit that subscribe and like below. And as always, thanks for watching.